What's up, guys? My name is Fari, and we are back with the YouTube videos. I know it's been a long time coming, but we're finally back. But this time it's going to be different. And I'm going to explain what I mean by how it's going to be different, how I'm thinking about certain things, and how, the realizations that I've had are transforming the things that I'm going to be doing into the future. But we're going to be going through the realizations that I've had, how I'm approaching this now. So, everything that I've learned and how I'm incorporating that, and how this is going to function into how I'm going to be operating and building that operator mode as well, and also what the main focuses are moving forward. But without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. So, the realizations that I've had is that, is if you may know or may not know, is that I did 154 videos each and every single day, which was insane to think about because the main goal at that time was only to do 30 days. And shout out to Ryan Clog, he's an absolute legend. He inspired me to, start out the daily videos, and then yeah, that ultimately, got me to make 154, which is super cool. And that, was a result of, extreme high output, but it always felt like something was off in terms of pushing out the videos, because each and every single day it became more about just the output of the videos and less focus on the depth. And I really wanted to focus a lot more on the depth in terms of, sharing as much value as I possibly can, and also making sure that, I'm not focusing too much on, the quote unquote motivational to say, these are the things that you should be focusing on, and, getting too idealistic in terms of, these are the things that should be working, and this is, how it actively should be working, as opposed to that. And just also understanding that the content leaned too much towards that motivational aspect of it, and not on the tactical side that I would have, at least wanted to focus a lot more on. And that is one of the things that I took a little bit of time on to try and, build that clarity mode around how I want to focus a lot more on being tactical and just going deep in the weeds, and like showing how the actual builds are going, and what actively goes inside, the builds, and actively showing that. Because those 154 videos, doing them each and every single day, it felt, more so like, more motivation, as opposed to being more tactical and being in the weeds, and not showing enough real problem solving, rather than, just talking about, hey, this is how you'd solve XYZ, but rather now just focusing in on how can I show real problems, and how I'm thinking through these, opening the loops, and, closing them as well, and the processes that go in between that, and showing that, this needs to have a lot more depth. Because at that time, I realized, after I had taken a little bit of a step back, that there was not enough depth in terms of the actual builds that I was showing. I was showing, surface, as I like to call, surface level builds for me, that weren't really showing the full case and the full use cases of the specific systems, and how those play into, every single thing that a business would need in order to function. Specifically, now just focusing in on the specific, ICP, or the specific ideal client profile that, would ultimately benefit from the specific builds. And I think that realization was, pivotal in terms of understanding how that, would lead me to changing my approach. And this is, the things that I've realized in terms of how I'm going to be approaching this now, because everything from now moving forward will be centered around building systems. So building, the OS is still there, the operating systems, and how they, solve real problems, real world problems, from the data or the feedback loops that I've basically been able to run, open and close as well, and the processes in between that. And that ultimately leads to the content being the output of the work itself, and not just the work itself. Basically focusing in on the output of the work, what is the outcome of the specific build, and how does it solve the real problems or the real bottlenecks within specific businesses, and the use cases for that can be applied to multiple verticals as well. Because I think that would show a lot more value instead of just talking, slash motivation, which, the daily videos did become a little bit repetitive. But I know that, switching this out and focusing in a lot more on execution, real builds, and increasing the iteration velocity, which is something that I've been thinking a lot about, these past couple days, in terms of how can I increase the, learning and, the iteration velocity in terms of the things that I'm building, such so that, I can try and test out different things, see what works and see what doesn't work. Because now I'm in this phase or this space where we have this flexibility in terms of, just throwing a lot of things at the wall and seeing what sticks, because you never know, what is actively, going to be working long term. And I think, now with this, feedback loops, or just understanding how, things ultimately run, it's ultimately built this moat of, understanding that, the key, advantage that you can focus on right now is iteration velocity. How fast can we, close those opened feedback loops in order to gain data and use that data to make decisions off of. And also making sure that we're using this loop, which is build, test, and ship. So shipping the loops of the specific builds or whatever the use case is, but making sure that each and every single day we're building something, we're testing it, and we're shipping that loop and closing that loop as quickly as possible, such so that we can get the data and make clean decisions as well. Because the way that I, have shifted my mindset now, especially with the rise of, AI and all these different things, that speed is so important in terms of getting things out there, testing if it works, and just being as flexible as you possibly can as well. Because I believe that that flexibility, not only in the short term but also in the long term, will allow us to learn a lot more in terms of the things that we need to do, and also, improve on as well. And, by no means am I, an expert at this, but I'm learning each and every single day in terms of the things that I want to do, and also just implement each and every single day, and just focusing in a lot more on, execution. What are the tactical things that we can, implement, and make sure that we're also using this to scale as well. Because it's so much, to talk about, how we're going to build XYZ, as opposed to rather just building the XYZ machine, seeing how it functions, and then deploying it and seeing how, the real world use cases of it are. Because it's so many, you can see so many things that you can conceptualize and say, this would work in this specific field, but you necessarily don't have the right data in terms of, is it going to work, in terms of the real world conditions. Because those real world conditions, if they're not factored in and they're not actively tested, you can be functioning on, false beliefs that you think, are true, but, you test it in the real world, and then you realize that, what you assumed or your assumptions were ultimately false, and then you have to start again from scratch. And that usually takes a long time. But as opposed to that, I've, just taken the mindset or the realization of, I need to make sure that we're building and iterating as quickly as possible to find the stress points, the weak points, where the system breaks. And once we've identified that, we can then move forward as well. Because, with this world, with the way that things are moving, I believe that speed is, a competitive advantage that you can also have. But you need to make sure that with speed also, comes a lot of, headaches and iterations where things break a lot. And if things aren't breaking a lot, at least, from what I've realized over the past couple months, is that you're not iterating enough. And, you hear all these different things, like if you're, just building a lot of things, you're not really too focused on one single thing. But I believe that, in order to, identify or, have that level of pattern recognition, you need to be able to build a bunch of different things that are centered around one core. And that one core allows you to then feed off of the different things that you would be building into the future. And this means that, how I'm operating for this now is that I'm iterating or integrating AI in terms of speed, front facing execution, core thinking, but also, having that core thinking mode that stays mine. This is one thing that I've also learned to as well. Shout out to Ryan Dice, who mentioned, that 80 or 10% comes from you, and then 80% comes from the human, or the AI work that does it, and then the other 10% comes from you just polishing it up. And I may be butchering it exactly how it's saying or paraphrasing it, but that is the core principle of, keeping the core thinking to be yours, such so that the execution layer of it just comes or is utilized by AI. And then at the end, you also integrate your input as well, or your final finishing polishes, such so that you make sure that whatever it is that you're working on, whether it's data, whether it's front facing execution, that you make sure that it is, outputting the right things that, suit your specific needs as well. Because you also get into this place where AI sometimes may hallucinate, and through that you want to make sure that each and every single moving part, although you're integrating it, also is, centered around your business and how it ultimately functions as well. And focusing in on not being the tools guy, but rather being on the problem solver. And what I mean by this is being known as the number one guy in XYZ tool, as opposed to being the overall problem solving person, or the person that understands how these different tools all connect in order to solve different problems. Because I believe that there is so much leverage in understanding, how to, develop a specific outcome, as opposed to being the guy that just knows, hey, I know how to use XYZ tool and that's my only mode, as opposed to, hey, I know how to solve this specific problem whilst using these different layers or the tools in order to get the specific outcome. And everything all feeds into one core, which is ultimately the systems, which encompasses the data, ops, and dashboards. So everything falls or flows into one specific core, and everything else then feeds off of that core. And I like to think about things a lot more, in terms of having one single source of truth, if you will, and then everything else basically feeds off of that. Because if you have that core, then you ultimately understand and you have that foundation that, you can use to then build on top of. And then everything else just becomes a layer above or below. A layer above that. So you have your foundation, and then you build everything else on top. The interchanging parts, you can, swap them out as you will, which are basically like your tools, etc., etc. Because tools, you can swap them out. A new tool comes out next week, or it comes out next month or 6 months from now, that you can swap out. But the core function of it, the problem solving mode, ultimately needs to stay at the core, because everything else, you can layer up on top of that. And that's just my own personal belief. And that core, is ultimately systems, which, like I said, encompasses data, ops, and dashboards as well. So inflows, outflows, data ingestions, warehouses as well, and how these are used in order to scale the business as well. And one of the things as well, this is just a side thing that I thought was super valuable to incorporate into this, is that I read, shout out to Courtney, this is a article that I read on X, and it made me, start to play the game of Polytopia, which, has been one of the things that I've been playing a lot of ever since I read the article. And the lessons, or the key lessons and the realizations that I had from this, is that, you have limited, or the game of Polytopia, for people that don't know, is that you basically have this empire that you have to either build or scale, or in 30 turns or less. So you have to build as much as you possibly can within a confined, or this constraint of 30 turns. And from that, I realized that, for me, my personal takeaway from this is that limited turns equals limited times. And you can apply this into the real world, because you see that, you have 30 turns, or you have limited time in order to build, or either just drift in terms of what you're doing. And rather, once your time is up, what only matters is that what are the things that you've built, and in that case, what matters most. What are the things that you're doing on a day to day that you are using or making full use of all your resources in order to build that specific outcome, which is what you actively build. And focusing in on, once this limited time that we have, at the end of it, what are the things that you have built, because that's what truly matters. Then you also, just realize what are the things that you need to be doing on a day to day that, builds that specific outcome. Are you focusing in on, things that are mundane, that don't really scale your level of output, which leads to that outcome? Or what are the things that you're focusing in on? And that strips away all the things that are unnecessary in terms of building that specific outcome, because you know what it is that you need to actively build within this limited time or these limited turns. And I will make another video a little bit more in depth in terms of how I'm also thinking about incorporating this into specific functions of me as well, and how that is also going to be built up. But that I'm going to make into a specific video by itself. But that ultimately leads us to, well, focusing in on what is going to be forward, or the forward things that I'm going to be focusing in on. And that ultimately comes down to focusing in a lot more on in the trench builds. So each and every single build that is in the trenches, showing that off, which incorporates or encompasses the systems, dashboards, and real workflows. How are these functioning in order to create a specific outcome and solve real world problems, with the real world use cases also incorporated into that, and also specific outcome metrics and all of those KPIs, because I believe that those are also important to share as well. Outcomes matter more than what the specific features and all these other things that are irrelevant in the grand scheme of it, but just focusing in on what is the specific problem and what is the outcome that we are ultimately building, and showing in a lot more on the mistakes that I've made, and also the iterations as well, and unpolished works as well, because they are some things that you start off and then you see that, hey, maybe this wasn't the right thing to build at this specific time. But then also that you never know, later on that can be something that once you've built a lot more pattern recognition in terms of building a lot more and running those iterations, then you realize that, hey, I built this XYZ time ago, but now that I've recognized, or I've learned all these different things, and spotted these different patterns as I've grown a lot more into the game, that, hey, this actually connects with something that I'm doing now, and that scales into the future. But that only comes as a result of actively building and executing as well. My personal belief around that at this point in time, and it can always change into the future, but just making sure that we're understanding, and I'm understanding that each and every single thing that I'm showing needs to be focused in around on the core, which is making sure that we're building systems and also feeding everything else from that. And that means consistent weekly cadence with these videos to show what is working, what is not working, and what I'm actively building. And I think that is also just for documentation purposes, making sure that watching down these videos in 10-20 years from now, that I understand the things that I did right, did wrong, could improve on, because there's always things that I believe you can always improve on. But just focusing in a lot more on for me, what I want to focus in a lot more on is getting access to better rooms, real operators, and building relationships, because I know this building game, or this life game, you can only do so much by yourself, but you can do a lot more with other people. I think the saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go further, go together. I think that's how the phrase goes. But yeah, just focusing in a lot more on getting access to bigger rooms where I'm the smallest fish constantly, and access to real operators, people that are building at a high rate of a high velocity in terms of iterating, and also frequency as well in terms of they build and also how they operating and running things, because you only improve or you only go down to what your surroundings or your environment is, and bettering that environment is one of the things that I'm building and focusing in a lot more on going forward. So this is basically essentially how I'm thinking about building and the things that I've learned over the past couple months. I'm going to be trying to make these videos, or not trying, I'm promised to myself that I'm going to be making these videos each and every single week, encompassing and showing, what are the things that worked, what are the things that didn't work, and just documenting that as well. And you only get better, like I said, with a high rate of frequency, I mean, with a high iteration velocity, and from that is the only way that we're going to get better at these videos and get back onto speaking on these videos a lot more, better on. I will do that into the future. But yeah, if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to check out my X, LinkedIn, Instagram. Links are in the description, and also my newsletter is there if you're interested in learning a lot more about what I'm building, what I'm focusing in a lot more on as well. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next video.